We're joined here by Chris Bunch, head coach at Webster University men's basketball, to talk a little bit about the SLIAC All-Decade team. Coach, thank you for joining us today and looking back on the past 10 years of SLIAC basketball.
It's an honor to be here. I'm glad to do it.
I first want to ask you about, Spaulding came into the league in 2009. They had some quick early success thanks to Player of the Year, Dejuan McAfee. And then the following year, you had a player, Stefan Whittingham, win the Player of the Year. Can you talk about those early battles between you and Spaulding and Dejuan and Stefan?
Well, I had to when you sent me the question, I thought about that a little bit, and I had to go back and do some research. Actually, Dejuan was Player of the Year, I think the year we went to the national tournament in 2011, and we had Willie Trimble and Drew Moore and Nick Jones and that crew. And Stefan didn't play any. He was like, we probably played 9 guys, and he was probably our 10th guy. And so I had it was either 5 or 6 seniors that year. So we were real senior heavy, and he didn't play much, if any, hardly. And so the next year when he was the Player of the Year, I remember my assistant coach, Mike Senior, who's the soccer coach now, would laugh and say, "And to think you were playing that guy behind all those other dudes last year." And I was like, well, we won 20 games, and obviously it didn't hurt us that bad. But but there was, when they first came into the league, they were really good, and Dejuan was really good. I was just actually talking about it with my wife last night. We were talking about what I was going to do today, and I said, "Man, I remember that we played them here one night, and he was making shots in the second half. He got hot, and I just turned to the assistants at one point and said, 'Boys, if he can make that shot, we just all need to go home.' I said, this one's over." And then he got in foul trouble or something, went out of the game, and we went on a run and got back ahead and actually won the game, I think. But he was some kind of a player. He was really skilled. He could do it all.
Talking about the Gorlocks now, talk about a couple of the earlier players in this decade for you in Roman Robinson and Ahmed Smith. What do you remember about their games?
Roman might have played as hard as anybody I've ever had play. I mean, he was just a bundle of energy. I mean, he played so hard. I used to laugh and just say sometimes he plays too hard. I mean, he would just get a little out of control sometimes because he was just going so fast all the time. And but really worked hard, had a good attitude. It was really athletic. I know I used to laugh. One of his moves that he would make he'd drive and shoot and miss, and then like catch his rebound on the other side of the basket and lay back in. And sometimes I would look back at the assistants and say, I think he's doing that on purpose.
And his stats on getting those rebounds.
But he was a really good defender, really good rebounder. He wasn't very big. I mean, he was 6'2" or 3, and he wasn't real. He was pretty thin. But played hard, was a really good rebounder. And then Ahmed, of course, is like the second leading scorer in school history. He could really score. He was fortunate enough to be like young, playing with Roman and that crew, Roman and Stefan. And then when he was older, then he was playing with Kevin Miller and Hollis Edwards, and as when Hunter Ward was a freshman, and Aaron Griffin, and we had a really good team. Went to the national tournament that year when I think he was a junior that year. And he could really score. I mean, just really score. He was a good shooter. I mean, he was a guard, but shot a real high percentage, for a guard, and was really good. He could shoot from the perimeter and was good at putting it on the deck and getting to the basket too. And he was just a really talented player.
When you look at this all-decade team, there's a stretch there for McMurray College where they had a run of 3 straight SLIAC Players of the Year, Brady Slagle, Clayton Whitlock, and Davis Johnson. What do you remember about that trio of players?
Well, they were all good. That's the first thing I remember. They were all good, and they were all different. Slagle was, Whitlock was, more of a post-up guy. Davis was probably the best rebounder and physical specimen of the 3. I mean, he was really active and was just hard to do. When he decided he was going to go get rebounds, it was just really hard to keep him off the glass. And Brady was a nice player too. I mean, he had a good run of players right there, and they all had good size. That was about the time when I first came here. I don't know, 7 or 8 years I was here, we always had the biggest team in the league. And about the time he ran through those guys was about the time we started getting smaller. So all of a sudden he's got these 6'6", 6'7" guys, and I'm trying to guard them with some 6'3". So they really presented a problem for us. But I mean, they really 3 really good talented players. They were a handful.
Another school on the list had a couple of players, Eureka recently with a pair of athletic forwards in Shea Feehan and Dakota Bennington. Can you talk a little about facing them?
Well, Feehan was another guy that there was times that, you know, I would just look at the assistants and just, I don't know what we're supposed to do with that. You know, he'd get hot and start making shots. He was just like, oh, wow, you know, and, you know, was just had a really quick release, was really hard to guard. You know, he could go by you if you tried to get skin tight on him. And then if you gave him the least little bit, he could have the shot off before you could even jump and react to it. It was just a really, really good shooter. Probably the, you know, the best just scoring guard since I've been here. I mean, we would laugh and talk about, is there somebody better? Is there somebody who scores better than this guy? Because I don't remember. You know, he was just really explosive. And you know, Bennington's a little different, a little bigger. You know, really athletic, really good leaper. Scored in a lot of different ways. I mean, they from alley-oop and he could a dunk and he could shoot the 3 and was really good at driving and, you know, getting into you and getting contact and drawing a foul and still making shots and was just he presented a lot of problems for us in a different kind of way, but was just those 2 guys were really, really hard to guard.
Speaking of scoring, let's go a little more recently with players like, Steven Sukup of Iowa Wesleyan, but in particular, Micah Paulson and, of course, one of your players, Josh Johnson. How explosive of scorers were those players?
I think Josh was probably, if I was looking at some of those other guys, and he'd probably punch me in the face if he was sitting here right now next to me. But I think Josh was probably the least explosive of those guys. Josh was really, I felt like, one of the better technically good players I've had. He spent a lot of time working on his shot. He spent a lot of time working on, you know, getting open to get a shot off and you know, moved without the ball well, understood spacing real well. And, you know, I never really thought that Josh was just super explosive off the dribble. I mean, he wasn't the quickest guy we ever had. I mean, we've had guards that were quicker. It was just probably the smartest guy we ever had at just getting open, getting shots off, and then spent a lot of time working on his shot. I mean, he probably shot more in this gym than anybody I've ever had. And people would say, man, he can really shoot. I'd say, well, he ought to be able to as much time as he's ever on his shooting machine. But, you know, it was just – and so he would have explosive runs, but it would just be a lot of different kinds of shots. You know, he just got open in a lot of different ways to get shots off. I mean, he was very good at that. You know, Paulson was just – you know, there's another guy that was just really hard to guard. He could go left, he could go right, he could shoot it, he could drive and pass, you know, and Principia has always just given us fits. We've always had he does a really good job, Todd does, of running their stuff. And so they've always had guys that was just hard for us to defend. And Michael was just really good, really a good scorer. And just another one of those guys, sometimes when they got hot, that you just felt like you were just hanging on for dear life, trying to steal a win and get out of there. Because I mean, he could really light it up. And then, and I'm sorry, you mentioned Steven as well in Iowa Wesleyan. He was, you know, the really good player. He came there with him and his brother, and you know, he was probably one of the more efficient guys I have ever seen in this league. I mean, shot a really high percentage. Another guy that was really good at understanding angles and driving angles and getting open and shot fake and drive and things of that nature. Was really really hard to guard because he could do a lot of different stuff too. But I always felt like he was really efficient. I mean, I didn't think he took a lot of bad shots. I mean, he just understood what he was trying to do out there on the floor really well.
And my final question for you, we've seen over the last couple of years the Blackburn program make a return, 3 straight trips to the SLIAC tournament, and a lot of that was because of the arrival of Carson Hayes. Can you talk about Carson and going up against coaching him these last few years?
He was another guy that was really tough, and everybody's kind of tough in a little bit of a different way. Carson was really strong, had a really good, like if he ever got his hip by you and got going to his right and got half a step past you, he was so strong you weren't getting back over in front of him. He was getting to the basket unless somebody else stepped over and cut him off. But he was a good shooter, could really shoot from deep. I mean, and so you had to get out on him, and then that his driving ability and his strength. If you didn't keep him in front of you, I mean, if you let him get half a step past you, he was getting to the rim. Or if you got help, then he was really good at passing to somebody else. And they shoot a lot of threes, and so he's very good at driving and kicking out to the shooters. And another guy, and he could also get on the glass too and get some points off putbacks and that way. So just another guy that was just really, really a handful to try and defend.
And then, Coach, finally, as we look over this all-decade list, are there any players that you're kind of glad you're not having to devise a game plan against anymore?
All of them. Definitely. We really. I don't know that I can ever say, "Oh yeah, man, we handled Feehan. We shut him down." I don't know that we ever. I'd have to look back at the box scores, but I never felt like we did a very good job with him. With a lot of good players there. I'm glad I don't have to see any of them anymore, actually.
All right. Well, thanks for reminiscing with us, Coach, and best of luck this season.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian.